15th, 2019. A couple of notes for those who are joining us tonight. Parking is available in the College Avenue deck. After the meeting, you can come see Clerk Spratlin if you'd like a voucher for your parking there. In addition, you can always view these meetings live or taped at accgov.com, and you can view the agenda there as well. If you go to the splash page and just scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see the agenda link. We're here for a few purposes tonight, primarily our agenda setting meeting, but we are also going to have a special called session, and that requires a roll call.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Link.
Here.
Wright. Dixon.
Here.
Neesmith.
Here.
Edwards.
Present.
Harrod.
Present.
Thornton. Here. Hamby. Do we have a quorum?
All right, given that we have a quorum, I would entertain a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved. Second.
I hear a move for executive session from Commissioner Neesmith, a second from Commissioner Harrod. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, hearing none, we will move into executive session following our agenda-setting meeting. Motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All right, we've got a motion from Commissioner Harrod, a second from Commissioner Neesmith to end our special called session. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, hearing none, following our agenda-setting meeting, we will move into executive session. As mentioned, this is our agenda-setting meeting, so no final action will take place tonight. Items recommended for movement forward will be voted upon the first Tuesday in February. Brief programming note, of course, typically this would be the agenda-setting evening, the third Thursday of the month. Because the first Tuesday of the month was on New Year's Day, that put our schedule in a little bit of a Cuisinart. So the work session that normally would have happened a week ago on Tuesday will be happening Thursday, January 17th, here in City Hall at 5:30. And that also, of course, will be available to view online at accgov.com. If business is not concluded by 8:15, there will be a 15-minute break. There are going to be three opportunities for public input tonight. There will be an opportunity for citizen input on the consent agenda, an opportunity to discuss old and new business, and for the first time, we are entering into an opportunity to discuss those planning and zoning items that are on our agenda that are recommended for action by the Planning Commission. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the planning and zoning items. So first order of business, I'm going to ask the commission if there's any item from the consent agenda they would like to remove. All right, I see Commissioner Harrod.
Number 3 for question.
All right, and number 3 for a question. Any other consent agenda item that anybody would like to see removed?
I'm looking right quick here. Okay. No, we're good. Never mind.
All right. So item number 3 is going to move to new business. I'm going to ask now for citizen input on items 1, 2, and then 4 through 7. You have 3 minutes. Clerk Spratlin has a light in front of you that will be green when it is time to speak. It's going to turn yellow when you've got 30 seconds left, and when your time is up, it will turn red. I'd ask everybody in the chamber to please pay attention to anybody who's here for public comment. There are a lot of people who are not able to join us tonight, and so we need to be able to concentrate and hear those folks who are coming to speak to us. So any public comment on the consent agenda? Now is the time to step on up. All right. With no interest in the consent agenda items, we're going to move on to new business. So that would be item number 3 and 8 through 12. So is there any public input on those items? Come on down. Please give us your name and address, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Nat Kirkendall, and I live at 108 River Bottom Circle here in Athens. And I'm here as the chair and representative of the Oconee Rivers Greenway Commission. There is a letter from the commission that'll be in your inbox, but I'll just read it very quickly here. The Oconee Rivers Greenway Commission is pleased to endorse the preliminary design entitled Oconee Rivers Greenway Project, Subproject Number 2, Revised Preliminary Plans for passage of the North Oconee River Greenway Trail through the Oconee Hill Cemetery. We commend the Oconee Hill Cemetery trustees and the Athens-Clarke County Manager's Office for their diligent in preserving the historic fabric of the cemetery as a National Register property while providing for public benefits of the Greenway Trail along the downtown river corridor. This is a crucial link in the Greenway Trail network in the heart of Athens. We believe the sensitive design of the trail as presented is respectful of the historic landscape and will raise public appreciation of and support for the Oconee Hills Cemetery. Thank you for your continued support of the Oconee Rivers Greenway Trail Network, and we look forward to working with you in the new year. Let me add one other thing, too. We now have a vacancy for a person that will be appointed by this body later, and I would encourage you, if you have people in your areas that would be interested in being part of the Greenway Commission, that will be online within a week. So appreciate it, and thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kirkendall, and thanks for the work you do. Anyone else like to speak on our New World business tonight? All right, let us hear your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Cassidy Lord. I live at 915 Riverbend Parkway. So let me start over. Okay. I am Vice President of the Upper Oconee Watershed Network, as well as a graduate student within the Warnell School of Natural Resources. I have been working on implementing a payment for ecosystem services to protect source water watershed here in the Upper Oconee Basin, which is the drinking water that we all rely on. Through this work that I've been doing, I've become very familiar with a lot of legislation, ordinances, and literature that the county has produced. And I would just like to highlight a couple of those items in support of how the proposed changes to the stormwater ordinance can be tied into some of this work that's already been done. So here in the basin, we have increased levels of impervious surfaces, which is leading to a phenomenon called urban stream syndrome. Basically, that means that our riverbanks are cut very steeply, oftentimes undercut. There's a lot of sediment in the river bottoms. This is impacting our drinking water quality. And we're also having persistent problems with contaminants in the water from overland runoff. One of these in particular is fecal coliforms, which we have very, very high levels of. If you'd like to refer to the Northeast Georgia Regional Commission's water management plan, they have a very good map of that. So we're in a really good position right now to be able to tie a lot of this together. And the stormwater ordinance, in terms of the redevelopment items, is allowing for the stormwater system to stay a little more localized. We're not creating more sprawl within this already aging system. And this redevelopment allows for refurbishing of the system for those old repairs that are needed during the construction process. So we're protecting this system by reducing the sprawl of it and fixing the issues that already exist within it. It also supports some of the work that the Sustainability Office has been doing. They have been working on cataloging old growth forest stands here in the county, and they're cataloging a lot of the ecosystem services that are provided by county properties. So I believe that this can be supported through the stormwater redevelopment issues by guiding the development away from these environmentally sensitive areas. So if we're building on areas that have already been developed, we don't need to clear cut land, grade anything, and cause some of these development problems that we are experiencing already. It also decreases the need for new impervious surfaces. Clearly, that is one of the leading problems in urban stream syndrome. So UON is in strong support of the adoption of these changes to the ordinance, and we hope that it's an item that you guys take the time to carefully consider, because it does have long-term impacts within Athens-Clarke County, and I believe it really sets the ground to be able to develop some forward-thinking and innovative ordinances within the county. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Ms. Lord. We appreciate you coming. Any other public comment on New World business? All right. Hearing none, we're going to move on to our agenda and commissioner input. And I believe Commissioner Harrod requested that item number 3, which is a fire engine purchase, be removed from the consent agenda so we can have some discussion questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a quick question. I think I already know what the answer to this is. But so for the low bidder, Mr. Manager, I'm assuming they've already we previously purchased equipment from them, and we don't have any issues with anything we've purchased from them? Is
I
that
would
correct?
I need to find out our history of purchase from the
Okay.
vendor. They are not a notable vendor, but they're a respected vendor. I don't anticipate any issues, but I can find out.
Well, it's just when we're spending $600,000 on a vehicle, or 1.2 million on two. And then I just wanted to make sure that if we do not have other vehicles of the similar type that have been provided previously, does that raise any issues with maintenance? Do we have to buy any special equipment, or are all fire trucks pretty much can be maintained using the same type of equipment?
Yes, they've not changed, other than, I think we've added computers into the cabs and stuff like that. But it's a basic truck chassis that has the various firefighting apparatus built on top of it. So it shouldn't be a departure from what we normally know.
I'm happy for it to go back on consent.
All right. Any other questions
Subject to
about
getting an answer
item
from
number
my
3, the
question.
fire engine purchase, before we put it back on consent? Everybody feel comfortable with that back on consent? All right, fantastic. Gene, that's going to move back for our voting meeting to the consent agenda. All right, we're going to move on to item number 8, the Firefly Trail Project and some land acquisition and swap. Is there any question about that? If you would raise your hand, I'd be happy to call upon you. All right, Commissioner Denson?
I just had a question about a parcel 6A, the Smith Estate that's on here, and it's just saying that a Miss Myra Steen Malloy has been paying taxes, but doesn't seem like there's going to be any kind of compensation or anything here. And I understand it's like confusion with the ownership there, but just curious of how she's reacted to this deal. And
Well, we've been in contact with her. As the agenda item states, it's been difficult. Well, we've not been able to find anybody else, although we know there are some folks out there. So it's not a property that she's been using, and my understanding is that she is accepting of this and willing to go forward.
okay.
So I don't think it's a case of where this is going against what she wants.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question about the Firefly Trail item?
We put it on consent.
Is it okay if everybody, if we move that to consent? All right, Gene, we're going to move number 8 to consent. Nice. All right, item number 9, a very exciting movement on the Oconee Rivers Greenway project. Any questions about item number 9? I see Commissioner Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, I'm still getting used to saying that. So I'm also very excited about the project and the general plans that are laid out here. When I was looking into some history of the Oconee Hill Cemetery, I noticed on their website they talk about, let me take a step back. With the SPLOST funds that are available, it seems that we do have some money that we could be setting aside for some public art project here at some point in the future. So my first part of my question is, at what point or will we decide upon what that project will be, how much money that is exactly, or communicate with the Cultural Affairs Commission about what action they should take on that particular aspect of the project?
Well, that, give me 1 second on that. This is, new PDFs aren't working well. So that, right now, we have not acquired the right-of-way, and that's going to be necessary before we invest any effort in, we have to have that before the project can go forward. So what you're being asked to do is approve preliminary plans. In our typical construction process, that allows us to know the alignment, and we can specifically appraise the rights-of-way that's needed or the easements that's needed, and then negotiate with the owner, and that's what we were asking y'all to do. Once we secure that, then we know that we have the project. We will go ahead and pay the designer to finalize the construction plans, and that's when you start getting into the art aspect of it. Once you understand what the final product looks like, the amount is set at 1% of construction, I think, by policy. So that would be a known quantity, and of course we would just for the benefit of the public, the Athens Cultural Affairs Commission would vote whether or not they thought this project was suitable for public art, which other ones have, so no doubt they'll do that. So that comes a little bit later in the process, but yet to come.
Okay, well, in that case, I I think there's some conversations to be had with the trustees as well as the Cultural Affairs Commission to think about what might be appropriate given the history of the cemetery. So.
All right, comment from Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I'm glad that Commissioner Parker brought that up because, the agenda report does talk about the history of Oconee Cemetery, and I think that there's a great opportunity to really highlight that history through some kind of interactive artistic display and, really highlight the history of Athens in general.
If I can
Forward to
clarify
that.
something for everybody. So, this has been a long time coming. The trustees have done their due diligence and their responsibility to the cemetery, and they had longstanding concerns about the security of the trail coming through the cemetery. And really, the breakthrough was when we were out there together with the trustees, who have been very excellent to work with, is that basically we had to separate the trail facility from the cemetery. So when we talk about the placement of the art project, there's more conversation on that because technically the project is separated from the.
Yeah.
So you sort of get through there and then you get to Cars Hill and then the East Campus Connector. So that discussion will be had though.
All right, I see Commissioner Edwards.
So, to be clear, where this Greenway traverses the Oconee Hill Cemetery, there will be a physical barrier, a fence dividing the trail from the cemetery. You won't be able to visit the cemetery by going on the Greenway.
That's right. Now, what we could do, and we haven't gotten this far, if the trustees were willing and wanted to have day at the cemetery or something, there's obviously going to be gates, for both our purposes to access and maintain the trail. So, that could be something that we could work in partnership on. But by and large, it was important to them that the integrity of the cemetery, be maintained, no litter, no defacement or anything like that. So they wanted the trail separate.
And I saw in the preliminary plan a decorative gate called out along the Greenway Trail. What's the concept behind this gate? Will it be closed and open? What?
Well, it's when we didn't have separation, they wanted gates that would that we would have to close and open, which is a staff, kind of a burden on staff, and then it's also confusing if somebody's out on the trail and they're not, so
Locked.
Yeah, so you run against that. So my understanding of these gates is that they're really entrance ways.
Okay.
Because it was important for the aesthetics. For the trustees wanted something that really augmented the cemetery, and so these are entrance gates, if you will. They won't be locked. You'll have free passage, but they are made of granite and metal.
Signifying proximity to Oconee Hill Cemetery.
Yes.
Thank you.
They're not found anywhere else on the trail system. So
Thanks.
you're entering this place. They want people to be respectful with noise and everything if there's a funeral going on. So just kind of move on through and get to the other side. But it's going to be really pretty there at the bridge.
Any other comments or questions about the Greenway preliminary plans?
Thank you.
Everybody feel comfortable moving that to consent? All right, fantastic, Gene. We're going to move number 9 to consent as well. I'll make a brief note that as an ex officio member, as mayor, I sit on the Oconee Hills Board of Trustees. I've already had an orientation lunch with them, and I'll be meeting with them later this week, and they've been very generous. And I think given that the topography allows us to move underneath the bridge and thus not really be that visible in the cemeteries, of great comfort to them. All right, so we're going to move on to item 10, the long gestating Clayton Street infrastructure and transportation improvements. Be interested in any input that folks would like to provide to this one, right? And I'm going to recognize Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I understand we're going to be having a work session at which this will be presented on Thursday, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is kind of we'll have more time to get the full story, and I want to encourage the public to attend that work session. There are a lot of people who are interested in Clayton Street, a lot of downtown business owners, folks who live downtown and near downtown. So this will get a full and public presentation during our work session Thursday night here, and it will be televised as well, starting at 5:30. So I want to encourage folks to watch that and give us feedback through through email or whatever, and we can further digest this and offer any input. So yeah, just encourage the public to pay attention and watch us Thursday night.
Any other comments or questions about Clayton Street?
I have a quick one.
Yeah, Commissioner Edwards.
Could staff flesh out some of the decision-making process surrounding the tree placement for me? Just along the block, what was sort of the strategy behind that?
I'd have to ask the designer on that there's a couple things here, we've spoken briefly about it. Obviously, as you've read in the public feedback, trees was pretty much the main thing that folks wanted to see. We wanted to also space them such that, they weren't a barrier, to crowds downtown, which has been something late nights particularly. And we didn't want to pick a species that grew so tall that it totally blocked buildings. But beyond that, I'd have to ask about the actual distance between the tree wells.
Yeah, to put a finer point on it, I just remember during the master plan process, a discussion I had with Jack Crowley about how typically a good placement for a tree is on the property line, and then so that the front facade of the building can be clear and you can have a business's sign, and business owners typically respond positively to that, just along every property line demarcating each building, you can have a nice tree without worrying about growth into overhanging signs and, blocking somebody's front facade.
I guess the only immediate thought that comes to mind is just that the width of the buildings aren't uniform, so you
Sure,
would end up with sort of
yeah.
an asymmetrical.
Yeah.
And designers love symmetry.
Yeah.
But I'll ask and follow up with you.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts or questions about Clayton Street? One note, as long as we're talking about trees, is folks who are familiar with Clayton Street probably are familiar with the tree wells that come up to sort of knee level in some places, and the concept that's designed here in our agenda report and discussed would have all the tree grates at foot level, so you'd no longer have that impediment walking along Clayton. So just functionally speaking, I think that's going to be great. And Manager Williams, like to add some more?
Yes, I want to go back to Commissioner Parker's line of questioning. So this cycle, you were supposed to also see the public art, because the art that's being recommended by the Cultural Affairs Commission is actually a physical piece of the streetscape. Nothing that's in this streetscape plan will preempt that art from being incorporated, but with the request to have the diversity and inclusion work session, the request to have the judicial center, I had to push a few things to February just to keep it manageable. So that'll be coming closely on this one, because I think you need to understand the entire picture before we move much further in design. So that's an exception to what I told you before. That makes sense.
Art lovers, look forward to that. All right, we're going to move on then to item number 11, the first of two stormwater-related ordinance updates, this one regarding redevelopment. Any comments or questions about item number 11? I see Commissioner Neesmith.
Yes, I've been following this because two events occurred and crossed paths. One is that the State Environmental Protective Division, you correct me as I go here, okay, changed some of the stormwater requirements, which we saw as an opportunity to address the issue of redevelopment of existing sites. For example, let's say we have a car lot along the river, and they want to redevelop that car lot. The car lot was developed when there were no stormwater mitigation requirements. The development is such that under existing ordinance, they would have to implement a full set of stormwater mitigation, detention, and cleaning facilities. which often makes the development infeasible economically, whereas they can go somewhere and develop in a green field, in a new place, for less money than redeveloping the current property. So our staff worked on a new ordinance that we see here tonight that has different requirements for redevelopment if certain criteria are met. And I haven't studied it well enough to know what those are, and it's complex as heck, so we got to get into this at some point. Which encourages the redevelopment. The advantage of that is that we get improved stormwater management on an existing site. We save the business from moving. We save the development of a greenfield site, the spoilage, if you will, of a greenfield site that this business might move to. So we've improved our stormwater situation. We've made it economically feasible for a business to stay in place, and we've avoided urban sprawl. The other thing that happened is, guess what? A car dealer wants to redevelop a site and pointed out to us that I can't do it. It's just too expensive. I'm going to have to go somewhere else. And we had this going on. We put our heads together and showed them, here's where we're going. Now, today, I got feedback from the business's landscape architect about a couple of little tiny issues here. So I'm going to be offering staff some feedback. They're very minor. Basically, how you measure the amount of space that's being changed, that's being redeveloped. And I'll give you that, and you guys can decide whether you want to amend this or make the other commission-defined option. So I think this is a win-win for everybody. It's a win-win for our stormwater management practices, and it's a win for our economic redevelopment efforts.
Thanks, Commissioner Neesmith. Any other thoughts or comments? I'm going to recognize Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I just want to thank Ms. Lord for speaking on behalf of UON about this and bringing some clarity to their position and the environmental impact. And that makes it much clearer for me, having that perspective. Yes. So thank you.
Commissioner Harrod.
Thank you. I don't have any problem with this. I think it's a good ordinance, but I have a question, I guess, I don't know if it's for the manager or the attorney, but on page 97 of the PDF, it talks about giving the Director of Transportation and Public Works the authority to determine whether redevelopment is fully or partially infeasible. And so my question is, if the director determines that something is feasible and therefore needs to be done, is there an appeals process to that? Would that go to the hearings board, or where would that go to? Or is that the final say?
The way it's set up now, it would go to the administrative hearing officer.
Okay. Because later on in the document, it does mention the hearings board, and I was trying to figure out what the...
There's another process for hardships that can go to the hearings board.
Okay.
I'm going to recognize Manager Williams.
Thank you. And it's unusual that we have the agenda setting before the work session, so you'll get a deep dive and a better explanation of what's going on there. But I think that was well stated, Commissioner Neesmith. And I want to thank UON. I want to thank some local civil engineers in the development community and our staff for getting together to find something that you don't usually find, something that all parties can really get behind and champion. That's really good for the community. And I just think there's been a lot of effort put into it, and I can't wait for y'all to see it on Thursday.
Thanks, Manager Williams. I agree with that. I think we're doing better and better work in ensuring that, given the age of some of our infrastructure, we're allowing for redevelopment rather than, as folks have said here behind the rail, having to go and do exclusively greenfield work. So very good. Any other comment or question or thought about number 11? All right, we're going to move on to the very closely related item 12, which has new standards around stormwater for linear transportation projects. So any questions or comments about this one? Again, very closely related to the last. Commissioner Harrod?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm assuming that mostly the linear projects would be things like building streets and that kind of stuff. So, and I'm in favor of what we have in front of us. Now, would that only apply to ACC and private construction, or rather roads that are local roads? How would it apply to if there were a state road or something like that?
Well, the state does not obligate it to follow any of our local ordinances. So if it was, I would imagine if it was advantageous to them that they would avail themselves of it. Otherwise, GDOT has a pretty, rigorous process and their own standards that they follow. So I don't think that this will probably impact it.
Okay.
And you'll hear more about this, of course, at the work session, but basically, linear project is not very wide, and to try to incorporate over a long distance the appropriate stormwater facilities, it takes up extra land. It's a lot of extra cost. And in the past, staff just pretty much deemed it infeasible. In this new permit language that Commissioner Neesmith was referring to, they called out specifically, you need to have a policy for linear projects. So here, that's why we're here. And they also gave us some latitude to exempt certain things, as well as, deem some things infeasible. But recognizing that it does have an impact on water quality and water quantity, we're proposing this $4 per square foot contribution to, an account, if you will, that will be used for water quality and quantity improvements within that watershed. So we're trying to recognize that there are impacts and we want to mitigate those, but we also want to make the projects not so burdened by the full-on measures.
And so would this also include things like sidewalks, greenways, rails to trails, all that kind of stuff? And
you might remember, Commissioner Harrod, it was a few years ago where we came up with, because we were having this issue with our greenways, that if you sheet floated to one side and you had twice the width of the actual facility in buffer, that it would take control of that small amount of stormwater. So that is also incorporated back into this as well.
Any other questions about number 12? Comments, suggestions? I had one brief question myself, Manager Williams. So you mentioned the $4 per foot contribution for essentially remediation or management. Would that be a figure that floated with some index CPI or some other measure? Or would that be something that staff would revisit on a regular basis as construction costs ebb and flow, mostly ebb?
Right. Yeah, we would revisit that on a regular basis. It doesn't have a built-in escalator right now.
Okay. All right, Commissioner Thornton.
The $4, who is going to be responsible for the $4?
Well, the government, it would come from the project budget. And that $4 was derived from how much it costs to do these types of things. So that's an average for, so based on the size of the project, we would put so much into, count's not the right word, but
Fund.
into that fund.
But where does the $4 come from?
Well, it comes from it depends. If it's a SPLOST Trails project, it would come from SPLOST. If it was a paving project, it would be, that's partially state money, that's partially SPLOST, it's partially general fund money. But it would come from the funding source used to construct the project.
And if that was a private development, it would come from that private developer?
So do we have options as we move forward? If we have problems, when you are clear what fund it comes out of, I guess I'm trying to find out about the average taxpayer, that's all. Is that, and you did say general funds.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess another way to look at it is, if you did not pass this, you'd be spending the same amount of money on, temporary stormwater projects to accommodate it. And what we're saying is, just take that money and instead of, I'm not going to say waste it, but you're on such a small impact, put it towards something that can be aggregated for bigger and greater projects.
Okay.
Any other questions about item number 12 before we move on to planning and zoning? All right, we're going to do a little bit of seat relocation, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about our planning and zoning process.
What just happened? Oh.
You were done.
Just in case.
It's called winging it. They took my laptop.
All right, as we're getting set up, I'll just make a quick note about process. Folks who are longtime commission chamber visitors or viewers online or on ACC TV may recall that in the past, there was only public input at our voting meetings here in City Hall, and there have been a prior legally required set of input at the Planning Commission level. We've added to that now an opportunity for public input at the agenda setting meeting. So the way the meetings are going to operate, Brad Griffin, our planning director, or his designee, is going to present some basic information about the project, so we've got an understanding of the contours of the project. Then we will have an opportunity for 3 minutes of public input from any interested parties, and then commission discussion, and we'll move one project at a time in that way. So does that sound great to everybody? All right, so we're going to move on to some conversation about a project over on Dublin Street. Okay, Brad?
Okay, I was about to tell you that we've had a little bit of a technical glitch and they're following along with my laptop from the back, but we just lost that. So hopefully they will catch back up. I'm just going to go ahead and jump in on this one. They may be rebooting the computer in the back. First item is a plan development request at 250 Dublin Street. The request is rezoned from a single-family RS5 airport overlay district to an RS5 airport overlay plan development on about 3.3 acres. The basic gist of this project and what's driving the PD request is because this property, even though it's over 3 acres, it lies within the approach zone for our airport. That overlay district requires for by right development within the district, it requires that lots have to be a minimum of either 1 acre in size or the minimum size of the underlying zone, whichever is greater. So in this case, while we've got 3.3 acres, and we can move ahead to the next slide. There you go. One more, please. Okay. Instead of being able to have 3.3 acres in an RS5 area that would yield 3 lots, they're asking for the plan development for the purposes of developing 13 lots, I believe, on the property, which is actually less than the underlying RS5 zoning if it were in another location. So the airport's really what's driving this PD in conjunction with a desire for some amended design standards for this development. I think they've given you an example within their packet of a standard subdivision that could be built by right if they were not in the airport, that's a cul-de-sac and it's individual lots and it's front-loaded garages. What the applicant's trying to do here is what they call a cottage court community or a courtyard community, where it is almost a development where you have individual homes on small lots. Generally, these homes are turned inward to face a common green space where all of the houses share kind of a front yard area, and then they load from the back with alleys. And really, this has been done all the way through this process for the 13 lots that are within the PD. When you get into that, you get into waivers with regard to lots are required to have minimum frontage on a public right-of-way. Obviously, this PD does not obtain that because of the nature of the design of this PD. There are some other waivers. Let's see if this will come back up again. With regard to tree canopy, some things like that that are needed in order to accommodate this design. But I think it is important to point out in the note, in the end, they are not asking for an increase in density from the underlying zone. It's the airport that is driving this PD and the need to look at it from that standpoint. There's also an affordable component to this. The applicant has been in discussions with the land trust. They would like to look into possibly up to 3 of the units to be land trust homes within the development. And that is an ongoing discussion, and I know the applicant is here and could possibly provide some more information on that if you need some more details. But that is something that from the very beginning, given the proximity of this project to a rail trail and to downtown, that they were very interested in trying to build in a percentage component of affordable into this project. They're fairly small houses, 1,000 to 1,400 square feet in terms of their size. See if we can advance ahead and get to one more, please. Okay, you see there's the property. And one of the things that the applicant brought to the Planning Commission from just a standpoint of development analysis was it is really compatible or density to the existing lotting pattern that you see there within the block, especially to the left and above where you have Royal Court and some of the other streets in that area that are typically higher density than what's proposed. Next slide, please. You see the zoning there and the airport approach, with this being just in the center of it. Next slide. And then this was the kind of the development layout where you see those 7 houses that are to the top all face inward and load from the back through alleys. And then you have 5 houses that will front directly on Dublin, but again, with this type of design, the advantage you have is that those houses too will have parking and loading from the rear. So what you're looking at from the front are not garage doors. They've given you some typical architectural styles that they would follow within this PD if it were to be approved. And so with all of that, the Planning Commission certainly understood the concerns of the airport, but they felt like this was an appropriate development for this neighborhood in this location and ultimately voted to approve this. Now, for those of you that are new, Planning Commission is a recommending body to you. They send forward their request, and their recommendation was a unanimous vote to approve the PD.
Thanks, Brad. All right, now's the time when we'll take public input on item number 13. And again, any speaker has 3 minutes. You're going to see a green light when it's time to go, yellow when you have 30 seconds left, and red when you are out of time. Mr. Smith, just let us know who you are and your address, please.
All right, thank you, Mayor Gertz. Commissioners, my name is Bob Smith with Smith Planning Group, and I'm here representing the owner for this rezone request. And I want to elaborate on the request tonight. Brad did a great job, but I would like to make myself available if you have any questions. I'm also here tonight on items 16 and 17, should you have any questions on those. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Any other public input on item number 13? Seeing a very quiet audience, we are going to come to speak with commissioners about this. And since this is in Commissioner Parker's district, I'd like to have her provide some comment to kick us off.
Thank you, Mayor Gertz. I think Brad did a great job of going through some of the issues that the Planning Commission particularly had, but I've had a lot of conversations about this development with the people in the district and want to provide some of that that perspective as well for everyone's consideration before we bring this to a vote next time. So Mr. Smith has been in a lot of conversation with the folks who live over in this area of town. Throughout the process, Melissa and I have met with residents of Dublin Street, as well as at East Friendship Baptist Church with a number of people who live in East Athens, about their feelings about this project. Because this is an area that's very close to the Firefly Trail. It's an area where we're seeing a lot of very expensive new development, infill development over there that is out of reach for the folks that currently live there or people who are looking to stay where they grew up. And so we've had a lot of conversation back and forth about issues such as the participation of the land trust in the project. A lot of folks in that community don't have a lot of confidence with the land trust, and so that's been a lot of the area of pushback that we've seen, people who actually don't want them involved with the development. There's been concerns about affordability, though in talks with Mr. Smith, we've heard figures around the $160,000, $180,000 range for the market rate units and lower than that for the land trust units. Folks are still concerned that they won't be able to afford to live in this place, or that people coming in will flip it for values that they, again, won't be able to attain. And so that's a lot of the conversation we've had ultimately. In the planning meeting, one of the planning commissioners brought up the fact that if those figures are true, then that's still, under medium income for a person living in Athens-Clarke County if they're going to be paying that mortgage. And so really this is looking like it could be an affordable solution to housing in this area. As Brad mentioned, it's within the density of the rest of the neighborhood. And as I think I've heard Melissa say, we do need mixed income housing in this area. It's important to have a variety of kinds of people living in an area. So I look forward to supporting this ultimately, and I'm happy to answer other questions if anyone has them as we go forward.
Thanks, Commissioner Parker. Other input? See Commissioner Link, and then I'll hear Commissioner Neesmith after that.
Yeah, I want to thank Mr. Smith for his outreach at the very early stages of this project. I think Commissioner Parker had just been elected when he reached out to me to ask how to get in touch with her and met with us and residents. And I really love this project. I feel like this is the kind of development we need to be encouraging, especially in our in-town neighborhoods. This does mimic the pattern of the historic surrounding neighborhood. These are very modest homes on small lots, which means there will be some element of perpetual affordability. You know, of course, values are going to increase, but because there's a limited space, you know, these houses probably can't be added onto and become the McMansions that we're seeing in other neighborhoods. And 3 out of 13 houses that would be perpetually affordable through the land trust, that's a very high percentage. That's well and above your typical, you know, affordable component in these kind of projects. You know, I really love this project, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it move forward. And I hope that the folks in the neighborhood will understand that, you know, that this will be a boon to the neighborhood and the community. And I think once it's developed, I think they'll come to understand that.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Yes, I agree with everything you've said. I want to give you a perspective that I heard from the airport authority, just to clear the air on that. I was there when they voted to recommend denial, and I asked the question later why, and it was simple. The density was too high, period. They weren't concerned about anything except the density was greater than their guidelines, which for me is not enough. The benefits of this are great. The danger to the homes from falling airplanes is not particularly significant. And as far as noise and so forth, when a person buys a home in the airport overlay zone, they're made aware by law of the noise. And the homes have to be built to minimize that noise to a certain degree. So I think this is a good project.
All right. Any other comment on Dublin Street? All right, Commissioner Edwards.
I'm curious what sort of noise dampening construction techniques might you employ in this project, Mr. Smith?
Well, they're actually listed in the ordinance itself. The homes has to be built to good sense standards, which means a particular type of window and insulation requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I too, I love the public green space component for the houses. I think that really makes a neighborhood a more loving area to grow up in, so thank you.
Commissioner Denson.
Thank you, Mayor Gertz. Mr. Smith, I had another question also maybe you could offer some clarification on. Because, yeah, I agree. I really love the design here that has common space like this. I'm curious, especially on the north side of it here, if that would be fenced in at all, that green space up there, or if that would be accessible to other people in the community, in the neighborhood there.
We don't have any plans for a fence at this point. There's not any fence shown on the plan itself. We do have an obligation to protect the property of the residents here. So I guess the jury's still out there, but I will tell you, on the northeast side, there's a public right-of-way right there. And that's where we'll be accessing sewer on Royal Court. Okay, so anyway, the jury's still out at this point, but your point's well taken.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other input on the Dublin Street project? Lots of love for East Athens. All right, I think we're going to move on to item number 14, and Brad's going to go ahead and give us a presentation.
Okay. Item number 14 is a request for the creation of a special district overlay at the corner of Milledge Avenue and West Broad Street. When you see this next month at your voting meeting, you'll be asked to take two votes. The first one would be a modification to the future land use map to change the map from the traditional neighborhood and Main Street business to general business. And then the second vote would be to actually amend the zoning of the property from commercial general and RM1 to a commercial general classification with the special district overlay on it that you see. It's going to show up as commercial general West Broad Street. And to also approve, along with that, the associated text amendments that go into the zoning ordinance that create the specific design requirements, density requirements that have been drafted as part of the special district overlay. So really, there's not a plan with this at this point in terms of us to talk about specific design. Many of you, those of you that were here last year, I mean, this was a request that came to the planning department from the mayor and commission. So you played a part in the development of the standards, and you sent us the guidelines that you were interested in, and then we crafted that language and took it a step further. As you understand, there are also some additional elements with this property. The underlying majority property owner is certainly interested in a property donation that goes along with this, of which Athens-Clarke County is a third party as part of that agreement to ensure compliance with the agreements of the property exchange. But that really is an independent aspect of this overall project that is not built into or developed into the zoning requirements. So what we're going to talk about tonight are specifically those standards set forth in the special district if it were to be created and adopted. You see on the location map here, it encumbers the entire block of northwest corner of West Broad and Millage, bordered by also Reed Street and North Chase Street. The property currently you see on the left is zoned RM1 and commercial neighborhood. This is future land use. That's the change from the traditional neighborhood and Main Street business to the general business future land use classification that correlates then with the zoning of commercial general. Next slide, please. You see there, the majority of this lot is already zoned commercial general and is otherwise not compatible with the current future land use. So the change is necessary, and you see on the right there, it would carry in its entirety a commercial general designation with the overlay on it as well. Next slide. You see the subject property here from an aerial view consists of multiple parcels within the block, and as indicated earlier, this would be all zoned into the special district overlay. Next slide. Let's talk a little bit about the parameters of the special district overlay and what it was intended to do for those of you that certainly are a little bit newer to this process. What it really is trying to do, it is an interesting block in that you have the heavy traffic generator of Broad Street, you have the unique character of Millage, and then in very close proximity you have Reese Street, which is still largely, especially when you get to the western end of Reese, it still carries a residential character that is in need of protection. And then Chase Street's a little bit transitional too, in that the entirety of the west side of Chase Street is a church property. There are parking lots on that property as well. But where the standards are trying to take this special district overlay really are in part are doing a couple things. They're trying to provide some protection on millage in terms of currently commercial general zoning lets you build right to the street. The special district would require to start off, you've got to back up at least 15 feet. And then at that point, you cannot go up the full 65 feet in commercial general, only 40, which generally is going to equate to about a 3-story building elevation. And for the full 50 feet off of the right-of-way. Once you get behind that 50-foot line, you can go up full height. So we're stepping back. On the Reese Street frontage, there are a couple things at play. It does allow ground floor residential along Reese Street, which is not something typically you would see in a commercial general zone, but it is certainly something that is compatible with the residential element of Reese on the north side. It establishes setbacks off of the street on a one-to-one basis with the distance from the right-of-way. So if you are 30 feet in your front vertical plane of your building, you've got to you start at 30 feet off the right-of-way of Reese Street, so there's a transition back. But in no case along Reese can you be taller than 30 feet until you get beyond the 50-foot mark, and then you can go up there. It also limits access on Reese Street to only residential and institutional type uses in office. So while there could certainly be a large-scale retail go on the overall district within the commercial general zone, or a restaurant or something like that, it could not have direct ingress and egress to Reese Street. It would have to go Millage Chase or Broad Street. So those are the standards that you sent us that we have put together. The other important element of this is it does offer a density increase across the block from what was commercial general was 24 beds, what was RM was 16. It goes to 50 beds across within the limits of the special district overlay. And that's really kind of in conjunction with those increased standards that are in play in terms of setbacks and heights, massing. There are some material components of the district as well that you have in your packet that kind of will dictate how parking decks, for example, would be built if they are visible from rights of ways, how they have to be screened, those types of elements. So that's really what you're being asked to look at. The Planning Commission did make a couple of modifications to the original language that we had crafted on your behalf and presented to them. And it was largely, as you see here on the screen, they felt like as originally drafted, there was not enough protection along the Chase Street corridor with it carrying the commercial general zoning with regard to building setbacks and heights. And so what they were interested in including as part of their recommendation to you was to pick up the same restrictions or limitations that we currently have in place along Millage, which means they can't build right to the street. As originally put together, without the limitations you see underlined here, along the Chase Street corridor, a developer could go right to the right-of-way of Chase Street and go up a full 65 feet in the air with construction at that point. What these two conditions or suggested limitations would do is would require Chase to be treated the same as Millage. You've got to start at 15 feet back, then you can only go up about 3 stories until you get back to the 50. Once you get all the way up in the northwest corner of Chase and Reese, where that comes together, that first 50 feet or so off of Reese Street is going to be picked up under the Reese Street limitations too. So the area immediately across the street from the church, from the sanctuary itself and where that door comes out, is going to be largely protected from very large construction by the Reese Street component of the special district. So a lot of moving pieces on this one. The Planning Commission held it for a period of time to get a little better understanding, which helped them as all these pieces that you were involved in came together. And they send you a recommendation with a unanimous approval, but with the change you see noted on the screen.
Thanks, Brad. All right, we have opportunity now for public input on item number 14. Right, not a peep from the crowd tonight on item 14, so I'm going to ask Commissioner Link, in whose district this sits, to kick us off.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming. This is the property, the varsity property, and the historic Bernie House structure, and that's kind of what was the impetus for reaching out and trying to get these new guidelines established to save that property and maintain the historic residential character of a street in a very vulnerable neighborhood. So I feel like we've come up with a solution that is possibly the best possible solution. The zoning standards on that commercial general property are pretty intense. And I think we're able to mitigate the impacts of that commercial development on the existing neighborhood and also on the Millage corridor, which is a historic corridor that means a lot to folks. We see what our current design standards have gotten us with a hotel that's built literally overhanging the sidewalk right across the street. So we'll have that setback and a lower building height on the Millage side. I have some thinking to do about the recommendations of the Planning Commission. I'm not sure how impactful these recommendations are because there is a buffer built in that would back up to the Reese Street lots. And so I'm not sure how much, and those lots would be subject to that two-story height limitation. So I have some thinking to do about that. I'll possibly have a CDO. But I do want to thank Mayor Gertz and Commissioner Neesmith and Commissioner Wright, who worked with me on this, and the property owners who were open to this discussion. I feel like we've come up with some design standards, and I hope that we can think about these kind of standards for the rest of the corridor, especially for that West Broad Street corridor, and other corridors, and also downtown, coming up with these kind of setbacks, height limitation setbacks where you have, a limited number of stories, and then you set back, and then you can go up higher. That makes for, it eliminates that canyon effect, and it makes for a more pedestrian-friendly environment, and also allows light to get through on your skyline, and generally aesthetically pleasing skyline in general. So I'm glad that this is moving forward. And I know a lot of residents, they feel much relieved as well.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Link. Commissioner Neesmith.
Dare I say, I echo her comments. But I have, it has been a long time, and it's been a lot of great work. The one question I have is, will these changes that are suggested by the Planning Commission have an effect on our dealings with the property owner? And we don't need to answer that tonight, but I think that's critical. It may not be something we want to do. It may not be really an option we have, is to make these changes. And I don't think these changes are that important because of the effect Reese Street has on the church, which is positive. So.
Any other input from commissioners on Reese Street? I similarly am very appreciative of the property owners and the land planner and the other commissioners who sat in the laboratory with me, and also Brad Griffin, Bill Berryman, Manager Williams. I think this is a win for everyone. I'm similarly situated when it comes to consideration of the Chase Street question. As you move back along Chase Street from Reese Street, not only is there kind of 50 feet of relatively low opportunity, but there's a 20-foot planted buffer required between what would be the donated property and the commercial property. So I don't think Chase Street would be impacted, and so I would welcome a CDO there. So thank you much, everyone. All right, we're going to move on to item number 15, which regards a property on Nantahala Avenue. So Brad's going to present about this one.
Okay. Thank you very much. The request is 0 and 298 Seminole Avenue, along with 190 Nantahala. It's a request to rezone from employment industrial and RS8 single family to an employment office plan development and an RS8 plan development. Proposal is to rezone 2 parcels to, as just mentioned, to establish an office use in former railroad switch house and ultimately construct a new single-family house on the property. Because this is a plan development, if approved, it does carry with it binding plans and reports. Should note that this is also within the Boulevard Historic District, and so ultimate final construction of the house will be subject to review of the Preservation Commission, and you see that reflected in one of our conditions that we're asking for consideration. There are a number of waivers with this. This is really kind of a fun project. We've been working with the Ogburns on this for quite a while now. And this one really just kind of screamed plan development because of where this all started was the Ogburns bought a switch house from CSX Railroad. Property wasn't zoned. It was within the right-of-way of the railroad. The railroad agreed to sell it. We had to put zoning on it. They carry limitations on what that property can be used for upon the sale, which could not be used as residential. And we've got this kind of industrial zoning that's floating around in the middle at the same time, which doesn't allow them to build a house on it, on the balance of the property, which is behind their current home now, under the existing EI zoning district. So totally non-conforming switch house, very limited in space, restrictions on utilities, zoning that doesn't allow a house to be built, but this picture in their mind of ultimately what they want to end up with and how do we get there. And it's been a journey for them. They've had to go back to start several times to work their way through this, and hence you can see the number of waivers that they're having to ask for and try to work their way through to make this all come to fruition. Next slide, please. You see there the property, this is future development. It's a mixture of employment and undesignated, which is the white on the left. And so we do have to place a designation on that portion of the property that contains a switch house, and that would go to employment. Next slide. And then with the introduction of a residential component, employment industrial was not an appropriate zone. If you move down one level to an employment office zoning district, which is still compatible with that employment future land use, it does allow a percentage of the overall development within that zoning district to be residential. They still needed a waiver on the percentage because of the size of the house, but it certainly was, in our opinion, a more appropriate fit for the overall scope. And then what you see with the little kind of the tail that comes directly south towards Nantahala, that deals with sewer. Currently, the property, based on topography, can be served by septic tank. There's a large component of this property that is currently covered in concrete that they're going to remove that could serve as a septic field. But unless there is a waiver granted through the state, they typically would not allow multiple uses to go on a single septic tank. So again, another challenge. We're going to put commercial in the switch house, which we'll show you in a minute. That could go on a septic tank, but they can't connect the house to it as well, and they currently don't have gravity up the hill into Nantahala to get sewer. And so they have been able to work through a process with the utilities department for a lift station on the house if they are unable to ultimately work through the health department issues. Next slide. That just, if this shows you anything, the house just below it with the pool that you can see, that's their current house. They would like to build an additional house behind that pool and pool house, potentially for additional family to live in. And then you can see the extent to which over the years, part of this property, which they also acquired from the property owner to the right, has been paved and used for parking, and they desire to remove all of that concrete. Next slide. You see a survey here that pulls in the switch house, which is upper left corner. Next slide, please. Ultimately, what they would like to do with some parking to provide for the commercial use that would go in that switch house, and then the location of the proposed single-family residence. Next. Next. And then if you've not been down Seminole, this is the switch house, the one farthest back, which is what they have acquired. Literally sits right on the right-of-way of Seminole. There's no room to park in front. Their proposal would be to remove the shed that you see in the foreground and be able to, that would serve then as their driveway, provide about 5 parking spaces for the existing use of the switch house, which we've requested because initially they're looking at some type of a professional office use. There are potentially some desires for some other uses down the road, but just given the restrictions and limitations and really no place to turn around once you get to the end of that street, we're requesting that it be limited at this point to that professional office use. That driveway would also serve access ultimately for the home construction. Next slide. You see there's the 4 spaces that would be provided to go along with the switch house, and then there would be parking. The way that house sits kind of in the side of a hill from the south side of it, it would read almost as a single-story house, falls away in the back, and there would be parking underneath. Next slide. And these are just some, with the understanding that they ultimately will go to the Preservation Commission for detailed architectural review and approval. These are fairly basic at this point in terms of to provide you with massing and scale. Next. And so what the Planning Commission is sending you is a recommendation to approve with several conditions. A lot of them just kind of cleaning up the final version as we move forward. There's a need to combine some properties together to ensure that we've got the access for sewer. Probably the biggest one here is number 8, which indicates that if approved, at this point, the PD goes in place. COA review resulting in a smaller footprint or elevation change to the house shall not be subject to a plan development amendment. I want the Preservation Commission to have the flexibility to make modifications to this house, and in our opinion, as long as it didn't get any larger than what you saw, we would deem that appropriate and can move forward without you having to see it again. So with all of that, interesting, challenging project in kind of a cool area, and the recommendation from the Planning Commission was unanimous to approve.
All right, any public input on item number 15? All right, hearing none, Commissioner Link has all the very interesting projects tonight. Any thoughts about this?
This is a fun, funky project. And it kind of provides an interesting history lesson of, Boulevard, which is now a fairly upscale neighborhood, which was once a crunchy industrial corridor. I really applaud the ambition of the applicants in coming up with this. I think it's interesting, and I look forward to seeing it go through the Historic Preservation Commission review. It's definitely a residential area, and it's perfectly appropriate to build another home there. And I'm glad to see that funky little building getting some use. So,
Any other questions or input on item number 15? All right, we are going to move on to Brad's presentation about a property on Berlin Street, item number 16.
Okay, the next two you're going to see, Berlin as well as North Avenue, are both straight rezone requests. There's a lot overall in terms of what we will bring you. Most of what we will bring are special uses or plan developments that have binding plans and specific conditions that go along with them. Both of these are requests by the property owners for straight rezoning. The first one at Berlin Street is a 2.5 acre parcel, currently zoned commercial neighborhood, and their desire is to change the zoning to RM2, which is compatible with the future development map Main Street business designation. The biggest difference between the commercial neighborhood and the RM2 that they're asking for, it gives them 8 more beds an acre than what they have under CN, and it allows them to build ground floor residential, where they would have to go over the top of commercial under the CN zoning. This one came to us one time. We had some issues with it. The applicant went back, did a little more analysis, and brought it again. And next slide, please. Before I get too far ahead, there you see the zoning change. There is RM2 in the area. One more, please. You see the subject property, currently a combination of a kind of a long-standing family property. I think there was an auto repair business for years on this property, as well as a welding shop. The family is now in a position where they need to sell it, and so the individual interested in buying it is the one pursuing the commercial neighborhood. I think what's probably the most important component of this property, because typically 2.5 acres zone commercial neighborhood on one of our major corridors at a signalized intersection, why would we change that to RM2 and not keep a commercial zoning on it? And the biggest reason that I think, led the Planning Commission to their recommendation is if you're familiar with the property, and if you're not, it's important to go up and look at it. There is a significant bank, a topography on the western side of this property along North Avenue. It's probably 10 to 15 feet straight up off of the right-of-way up to the top of the hill, which makes it extremely difficult for commercial development under our design standards to be built to a pedestrian scale along the street when you've got that much grade change, and you also have an extremely large Georgia Power utility easement that runs along that entire western portion of this property, which further limits their ability to make significant changes to this property. Those two things in tandem really start to to make this property not very usable for commercial neighborhood under our design standards without a lot of variances, and I think that's ultimately what led the Planning Commission to their recommendation, which was a unanimous vote to approve the rezone.
Thanks, Brad. Any public input on item number 16, Berlin Street? All right, and I think Mr. Smith noted he was here in association with this item as well, if anybody has questions of him. This is in Commissioner Parker's district, so I'll ask you to kick off our conversation.
Thank you, Mayor Gertz. Actually, I wanted to start off with a question for Brad. What were the issues that were first brought to you when they initially brought the proposal to?
What was our concern?
Yes.
We didn't know that utility line easement was there.
Okay,
I mean, we
yeah.
knew the topography was there, but topography you can work around.
Yeah.
That in conjunction with that utility easement and the work that you currently see taking place on North Avenue now, I mean, it is largely going to set the grade on that property.
Yeah.
And make it extremely difficult to build something of a commercial nature that is oriented towards the street.
Gotcha. Thank you. I have no particular issue with the project. More density is generally good, in my opinion, so I feel pretty positively about it. As well, having gone up that hill on North Avenue a lot, I had a hard time even picturing this location because it is so hard to see when you are coming up to that area. So I understand the desire for the rezone. I guess I'd be a little bit apprehensive about what it's going to be used for, but there's lots of different kinds of dwellings in this area. It's across the street from the lodge where a lot of students live, but it's also right down the street from a lot of low-income apartments, right down the street from my house, and there's a lot of different kinds of people who live in that area. So adding more diversity to that neighborhood sounds good to me, too.
Any other comments or questions about item number 16, Berlin Street? All right, I think we're going to move almost across North Avenue.
Last
Go ahead,
item,
Brad.
cross the street and up one block. This is 217 North Avenue. It's the first lot north of the Lodge apartment complex. This property and the next two small parcels just to the north of it are still zone commercial neighborhood. This one is a little less than an acre. As with the last one, the change would add 8 beds to the development, still only yielding 23. I mean, if you're 2-bedroom average, 11 apartment units. It is compatible with future development. It is similar zoning to the adjacent, and as with any straight rezone, if approved, there are no voluntary restrictions or conditions in place. Next slide. You see the lodge there to the left and to the west. Next. And then that is the one small remaining piece of CN on the west side of North Avenue going up the hill. These 3 lots, the owner of this one, it's our understanding, did approach the other property owners. They thought possibly if they could combine all 3 and get a couple acres, they may be able to put something together that was viable. But in and of itself, a property this side, there's a little topo on it. It's small, it's hard to get in and out of. It would be difficult to do something of a commercial nature in this location with regards to access. And ultimately, that's what led the Planning Commission to their recommendation, as well as staff on this one, that it was appropriate to make the change to a straight RM2 designation instead of trying to force the mixed use on this very small lot in this location. Planning Commission's recommendation was unanimous to approve.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Any public input on item number 17 on North Avenue? And I think Mr. Smith, who spoke with us earlier, is associated with this project as well. This is in District 9, so Commissioner Thornton, you've got the first slice of this pie.
I do feel kind of like in the dark here because I did receive your email and I had so much going on, so I did not do my homework to be prepared for a thought here. But I will put out my thoughts and my concerns. That area has become very heavily student populated. We have, even on the Berlin side, traffic and parking. The other day I was with, so I think I would like to know more, I guess, and I don't think this is the time or place for me to put my concerns out there since I did not do my homework ahead of time, but I would like to know more.
Okay. Thanks, Commissioner Thornton. Any other input on this project? Commissioner Link?
I mean, I kind of want to echo those concerns because, yeah, we're seeing a lot of denser multifamily development, which isn't necessarily inappropriate in this area. It's close to downtown and it's on a main corridor. But my issue is with the fact that that corridor is so not walkable and the traffic is really fast. You got a big, wide downhill road. And I've noticed great improvement where we have put in those crosswalks and those islands. So I kind of hope that as we look forward, we can start to address North Avenue and make it more walkable and hope that some of those hundreds and hundreds of students that are living along that corridor can actually walk to campus and walk downtown, because right now they really don't and really shouldn't. Or bike even. So I hope that someday soon we can take a good look at North Avenue.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions about item number 17 from commissioners? I'll make a couple brief notes. Commissioner Link, in her comments just a moment ago, mentioned walkability and connectivity. I do want to point folks, if they've not looked at it, to the Athens in Motion plan. One of the recommended funding priorities in the Athens in Motion plan is a link up North Avenue to Danielsville Road from this area, which I think would be appropriate given the density that we've got and really the kind of mix of residents that we've got along North Avenue, Old Hole Road, and Danielsville Road. So I was excited to see that recommendation. We're, of course, going to be hearing more at a work session about the Athens in Motion plan and the recommendations for TSPLOST funding stemming from that plan and from a voter's approval of TSPLOST from just over a year ago. I also do want to let everybody know I met in the autumn with Mr. McDougald, the property owner, and stepping onto the property and walking the entire block, it was clear that there were probably not as extreme topographic challenges as there were on the Berlin lot, but certainly some topographic challenge if you were to use this for CN purposes. The lot's fairly constrained given that it's under an acre, sits up off the road, and if all three of the lots that are currently CN in a row there were used for CN purposes, you just have quite a few curb cuts in a relatively short span, probably making those walking questions even more significant as you add commercial traffic cutting in and out of each of those lots onto North Avenue. So that was a consideration in my mind. So I just wanted to put that out there, having had that conversation and spent some time on the property. So if there are no other, yes, Commissioner
Yeah,
Neesmith.
just a comment, just to edify a little bit. I mean, this is a straight rezoning, so there's not much to learn except what the rezoning is, RM. There's no plan for a building, there's no plan for a parking lot, there's no plan whatsoever. That comes later, and that will probably be something that goes through plans review and not through us. They'll have to comply with the current requirements for the current zoning. So, like Brad said, we don't often see straight rezoning. We usually see a planned development where we see what's going to be done. That's not what's happening here.
Commissioner Thornton.
I beg to differ with my esteemed colleague. There's a lot for me to learn. And even what you just said, I never knew. So there's going to be a learning curve, and I appreciate your help.
We're here to help.
And we can move forward.
We're here to help.
I think, Commissioner Thornton, just to sort of link your questions with some of what Commissioner Neesmith provided, it'd probably be beneficial to visit with Planning Director Brad Griffin or his staff. They could lay out for you what, under RM2 guidelines, essentially are allowable on a lot of this size and shape, because our guidelines have gotten more and more specific. So you wouldn't know what every cornice and every window would look like, but you would know about where the building would probably sit and what a parking lot would look like and those kind of things.
Well, it definitely is on my list. Gene already recommended that I do come talk to you, so you're on my list to be in contact with.
We look forward to it.
All right. Any other thoughts or questions about item number 17? All right, we are going to now thank our audience for visiting with us tonight, but we are going to move into executive session. And so we're going to take a quick break as we do that.